you want to run faster and farther, lift stronger, become a better hybrid athlete, and increase the quality of your life, you came to the right place. Today's guest is Mark Bottenhorn, my personal running coach. He's an ultramarathon runner, Hyrox competitor, former bodybuilder, running coach, hybrid athlete, podcast host, and overall just an absolute legend. Mark's coached me through both of my marathons and my ultramarathon and has massively improved my performance as a hybrid athlete. This is a masterclass of all things running, strength training, nutrition, recovery, and is packed full of value. If you enjoy this episode, please subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Appreciate you guys. Now let's get into the show.
For me too, it was like such a different style of training. I mean, even just doing it for a month, but such a different style of race than ultra, like with all that vert rather than just like going for the sub 3. It was crazy.
Yeah, it really is drastically different, and it was two different situations, right? Obviously, like kind of changing your training and approach in that short period of time is be more specific towards the race, and then for him it was just a matter of like consistency, right? Because like the hardest thing to do aerobically is like make any type of development without consistency. Whereas like I don't know, I feel like strength training, you can sometimes train one time a week and maintain whatever strength gains that you have, but it's very hard aerobically to do that if you're not perfectly consistent. So it was interesting to work with both of you coming from opposite ends of the spectrum in that situation.
Yeah, it's interesting too because I look at the kind of training that you do too, and that you've done where you've been in like the top of the top in terms of like ultra and racing and doing that kind of stuff, but then also doing the kind of aerobic fitness that you do with Hyrox now and the more high intensity stuff. What do you think has been more like harder to build and hold on to? Is it more like the long aerobic stuff, or is it the more higher intensity like engine building stuff?
For me personally, it's the long. I mean, there's a genetic component to this, like so that should be said first and foremost. So for me, it's the long aerobic endurance stuff is always much harder for me than the high octane kind of engine building stuff like that. Like because of my muscle fiber makeup, I'm much more suited to be a powerlifter than I am an endurance athlete. But the good thing is we can train those muscle fiber types to act like slow twitch muscle fiber types, and as a result, it works out. It just takes longer. So for me, definitely, I think I'm more suited for the high rock stuff, the shorter distance, more explosive stuff. But I love doing the long stuff too. So life's too short to not do all the things that you love, I guess.
So when you're doing one thing or the other, so for example, like you're focused on the higher intensity stuff right now. For me, injured right now, so just really focused on getting healthy, but have been more so on the endurance front after playing football for all those years. What is the benefit of doing like the opposite? So like if you're doing something like a training for a marathon, you're obviously training more of your slow twitch fibers versus a high rocks, you're training more of your fast twitch fibers. Is there benefit to like doing both of them, incorporating both of them into a strength training program or like a training program?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be a well-rounded athlete, to be more resilient, to be more resistant to injury, to be able to recruit muscle fibers to run faster. So for example, let's just say if you're working with like a marathoner or a half marathoner, right? Like it's still important for them to strength train, in my opinion. And I think it's often neglected for the average person. The problem is that like when somebody identifies as like a half marathoner or something like that, like they're naturally more likely to go into the weight room and do things like 20 and 25 reps of things, thinking that one, that is more beneficial for what they're doing, might improve muscular endurance, but two, it somehow won't make them bulky or something like that. But the reality is the opposite is true. Like you should do things in the gym or the weight room in the opposite way of how you practice. So if you run a lot of miles, for example, weekly, like you're better off doing kind of lower reps with heavier weight. And the reason being is those are the types of things that are going to help you recruit the muscle fibers and develop the muscle fibers to run faster, to have more power output, to be stronger and more resilient. So things like that, I think, yeah, in some ways opposite attract in that way. But I think everybody can benefit from training metabolic systems in general.
So let's take, for example, you got a marathon coming up in 12, 16, 20 weeks or something like that, which also think doing 20 weeks, you were coaching me through the marathon, the sub 3 marathon prep. I think that was like 18 or 20 weeks. I was spent by the end of that training cycle. Whereas for the first marathon you coached me through in Philly, I think it was a little bit of a shorter training block. Like we started working together, but we didn't really start ramping up the volume until, a month, 2 months into that. And I felt more fresh and ready to go for that one rather than like doing like a 20-week or so block. So I'm going to veer off from my question here, but what do you think is there an optimal time frame for training for a marathon, or does it really depend on your skill level and your goal and some of those other factors?
Yeah, Dom, I think you hit it exactly. I don't think there is any optimal time frame. Obviously, you're not going to try to turn something around in 4 weeks, but so many of these things depend on the individual's training age. It depends on their genetic makeup. It depends on all of these different factors. Their lifestyle, is a factor that we don't often consider as coaches or athletes ourselves. But your lifestyle plays a huge role into it too. So it depends. I find that 16 weeks or 12 weeks is probably the most ideal when you're building up to a dedicated A race with other B and C races in there. But it just all depends on the person, their lifestyle, and how much time they can stay focused. Like if you can say a year from now, I want to do this race, and you can go through different blocks of periodization up until that race, that's good. But a lot of people don't have that. They don't have that singular focus with like we're wired for instant gratification. So I think somewhere shorter, like 12 to 16 weeks, is better mentally, probably better physically as well.
All right, cool. So now thinking on the strength training side of that too, if you break it up into, let's just go with 12 weeks, for example. So you've got
Mhm.
12 weeks. It's about, obviously like 3 months. So would you do more of like for strength training? Would you break that into like 3 4 week blocks, or like 2 8 week, or I know there's a taper in there with 2 weeks too. So how would you structure like a 12-week strength training program alongside a running program for somebody looking to, set a PR in a marathon?
Typically two like 4 week periods and then a 2 week period with a 2 week taper. I typically don't think that within 14 days you'd really need to strength train too much leading up to a marathon because it can take a lot out of you. But definitely not within 10 days. I don't think it's necessary because you can retain most of the strength gains anyway, as I mentioned earlier. So typically I like to do it like that, but it also depends on where the person's needs lie, right? Because some people might only be strength training one time a week. Like I coach some elite or sub elite marathoners and 50Kers who really only strength train 1 or 2 times a week, and their strength training looks a lot different than what yours would look like, for example. So the application of the science really varies based on what you're trying to do, the lifestyle factors, things like that. But in general, try to do a 4 week block in the beginning of the training cycle around hypertrophy, which isn't really effective um, for running performance, but it's effective for like building and maintaining muscle mass early in before miles get ramped up, and then you lose a lot of muscle. And then next, like pure strength output, there's the ability to do plyometric work and stuff like that too. Although I typically limit that with athletes because I don't work one on one with athletes, so a lot of athletes can't apply the plyometric stuff properly, and it just ramps up their risk versus reward is so low in that because it ramps up their risk for injury pretty significantly. So I like to do one based on hypertrophy, one based on actual strength and power output, and then a 2 week kind of maintenance cycle personally.
Okay, for the standard athlete, there, what would you program for though? Is that more of like again, like you said, it all depends on like lifestyle, their experience, things like that, how much time they're able to dedicate to it. But in terms of like, 2 3 4 5, like how many days a week do you typically recommend that your athletes are strength training, along with their running?
We're talking about just solely endurance athletes, right? Like not like hybrid athletes are the caveat to that because they're doing some kind of muscular endurance component 5 times a week typically. So we will just go and say like endurance athletes, like pure endurance athletes, triathletes, runners, ultra runners, stuff like that. Typically 2 to 3 times a week. That's what I find. I honestly think two is ideal for most people who are focused.
Okay. So two to three times a week for somebody who's really run focused. And are those like an upper body and a lower body session? Are they two full body sessions? Are you throwing some core in there? What do those workouts typically look like?
Yeah, so with core and mobility, you can kind of do those things as often as you want. I think it becomes redundant to do core work too often, particularly when you're in like the heavier part of the training block, because a lot of that core work is going to come from, um, kind of specificity of the training. So core work is going to come from deadlifting, heavy squats, stuff like that. Um, but in general, mobility and core you can probably do as often as you want. What I'm talking about specifically is like the strength stuff is going to take a toll on your central nervous system. So 2 or 3 times a week, I always almost exclusively program full body work for that. I know some coaches might do like a push pull legs and upper lower, but really I find that athletes benefit from and recover better when you're using full body splits.
Okay, cool.
And
So,
applicable to the sport.
right.
Sorry, there. It's more applicable to the sport that you're doing, right? Because when you're running, it's a full body movement. You're recruiting your full body. So, like isolating and doing like a pec deck or like chest flies or something isn't going to be really useful. And then I have to question, is that really the best use of your time
Okay,
in
so
the gym?
getting the most bang for your buck is what it sounds like you're trying to program with that. And I know that you typically comes from compound lifts or Olympic lifts. And for people who don't know what those are, typically things like, the standing overhead press or a squat or a deadlift, things like that. So are those things that you're typically incorporating into those workouts? And what do those kind of like sets and reps look like? Because one of the questions that I get a lot from people is like, how many sets should I be doing? How many reps should I be doing? How often should I be doing them? And then is there any like, accessory work to go along with them?
Yeah, so there's going to be accessory work, and yeah, so typically we'll build a workout around a compound movement. So, for example, on Monday it might be a deadlift, and then some variation of a squat. It's like it's a deadlift, variation of a squat, maybe a box squat, something like that. With the deadlift being the primary thing, sometimes it's like 3 times 5. Somewhere in the 4 to 6 rep range for that primary movement is good. But the thing is, all strength, just like anything else, requires periodization. So you're going to want to progressively overload each week. So like if you're doing 3 sets of 5 the first week, it might be 4 sets of 5 the next week. It might be the next week 5 sets of 4, things like that. So what I let you do is build a workout around a compound movement, a secondary compound movement, and then a number of accessories. And sometimes the accessories might be unilateral things like a split squat, lunges, things that are going to really train like lower leg stability or some kind of muscular stability, because I think that's often underrated when you're building a training program. It's really good to be strong, but you also need to be able to have the balance and the mobility to make that strength really functional.
Okay, so staying in this kind of 12-week training block right here, I think this is really good. So building it around those compound movements, those deadlifts, those squats, the presses, and there's even some, I don't know if you're programming any of like any like cleans or anything like that. I can get a little that
Yeah.
can get usually again it'll depend on the athlete for sure, I'm sure, but in that hypertrophy phase and like those first 4 weeks doing like what do the sets and rep schemes look like for those heavier movements? Because you just mentioned like a 4x4, 4x5 type split for like the squat and the deadlift. What are they looking like in the hypertrophy or muscle building phase?
Typically 8 to 12 reps.
Okay.
Typically 8 to 12 reps. It's all about time under tension, realistically. So, if you can I don't program for time though. So I find that 8 to 12 reps or 8 to 15 reps, the science is kind of mixed. I mean, pretty much if you're doing more than 8 reps, you're probably going to be training that metabolic system more. So just over 8 reps, typically 8 to 12 is where I find the sweet spot is, with 1 or 2 reps in reserve. So meaning if you put in 12 reps, you could have probably got 14 is what I find. So for the hypertrophy phase, I find that. And some athletes need a longer hypertrophy phase and some need a shorter. It just depends on their specific goals and what they need to do. Like maintaining a certain amount of skeletal muscle mass is really important for your metabolism, but it's also just really important to prevent injury and to have the foundation to run really well, to run a lot of easy miles and to run miles. So that's why I add that in there. And I think a lot of coaches weren't really doing that for a long time, but it's pretty common practice now.
What do those rest periods look like? Because I also see a lot of people who just like they'll take 20, 30 seconds and then try to hop back into it, which I definitely made that mistake before too. You're in the gym and you're just like, all right, I kind of just want to get in and out and I want to get that sweat and I want to huff and puff and feel like I just like worked really hard. But what is kind of like that optimal rest period, maybe for the hypertrophy phase and then also within the strength phase, because I know that they're very different.
Yeah, so a strength race can be really up to 3 minutes. I mean, you see a lot of powerlifters who are doing 5 minutes sometimes of rest in between sets, but because of the toll that takes on your central nervous system, we need to find some kind of middle ground because endurance athletes don't have 2.5 hours to spend in the gym each day because they have to factor in their running and other things as well, and it's just not realistic. So I think the most important thing for that is like I look 2 to 3 minutes typically for the kind of lower rep exercises, and the hypertrophy focus exercises are typically 60 to 90 seconds. I find is enough because you got to keep in mind you have 2 or 3 reps in reserve, and when you're doing that, like you're typically recovering fast enough that these things is enough.
Is it better to say you have a day where you got a double session, you got to run, and you've also got one of your strength training sessions? Is it better to do one before the other? Like, should you do them at separate times of the day, or does it matter, or is it based on your lifestyle, or is there an optimal time range, or how does that work?
Yeah, I love this question. So there's no one size fits all answer again, which is going to be frustrating for anybody listening because like it's so hard to speak when you're talking about science, you're talking about the application of it and anecdotal evidence on top of that. It all just depends on the person and the purpose. But the reality is it does matter, I think. So one, I would look at what you're prioritizing, right? Like if your goal is to run a 5K PR, then you're probably going to want to strength train after you get in that quality session that day. Like you're not going to want to go run compromise 400s because you were squatting before them. However, if you are a hybrid athlete or you're an ultra endurance athlete, I could make the argument that doing your weight training before and running compromise has a lot of physiological benefits. So it just depends. Some of it depends on logistics, like based on when you can get to the gym versus when you can get to the track, when you can get to the trails or whatever it is. But in general, I find for endurance forward athletes, strength training beforehand is probably not the best thing. So I would do the run first. You can strength train almost immediately after while you're taxed, or give yourself 3 to 4 plus hour break. Sometimes like people will run before work, do their whole work day, and then strength train after, and that's totally fine as well. But in general, I like to think that if you're endurance focused, you should do your endurance work first. You should prioritize what's most important to you. And that's two-part. One, so you get the most out of that session, but two, in case you don't get the second session in that day, it's probably more important to get the run in. And then finally, I need to say this with a caveat, like for a lot of ultra endurance athletes, I've been programming their strength work beforehand. I've been pre-fatiguing their legs before they'll go on like longer up tempo runs and things like that. They've had a lot of success, over the last several months. Have had athletes on podiums every single week of winning races, whatever it is, and they've been using this methodology. And I think a lot of coaches, there are a few coaches right now who are doing that, but a lot of coaches are doing the more traditional way that I said. So there's an application for everything, but in general, I think I would prioritize running if that is the focus.
Gotcha. Okay. Would you recommend doing them back to back, like you strength train and then you immediately go out and do your run, or one in the morning, one in the evening, afternoon? What is kind of your take on that?
In my opinion, I think back to back in an ideal world is best because then you allow yourself more time for recovery. As you know, and I know you know this, and a lot of listeners know this, but really, I think whatever you do in the gym or in training for 2 hours is really important, but it's the other 22 hours that are going to largely shape how successful you are in any training program, how you recover, how you rest, how you plan and prepare to execute the next day. And so, anytime you can condense those closer together, I think you're going to have a more effective recovery period and a better preparation period for the next day, next training cycle. But I understand also that people work and they might not be able to take 3 hours to go out and do a training session or, an hour run and a 45-minute gym session together.
What are some of your optimal protocols for enhancing recovery?
Oh yeah, that's good. So one, I think starting outside of it, um, increasing your antioxidant intake is very important. I think we live in a world that's just filled with the option of convenience foods and things like that, which is great. But at the same time, it lacks a lot of like fresh nutrient content. So fruits, vegetables, things like that. I take a green food supplement in the morning, every morning, pretty much. And when I'm not traveling, but I'm working on getting better about taking it with me when I go. But basically, I take a green food supplement to kind of fill in gaps. So I think that's most important, or very important. I think hydration is crucial. The most important by far is sleep. So a lot of people like will buy $1,000 Normatec stuff, which don't get me wrong is important. And I'm sorry if Normatec is like a sponsor of the show. I don't mean it like that, but like
Nope.
we're better off getting a really good 8 or 9 hours of sleep, 7 to 9 hours of sleep, than we are spending thousands of dollars in recovery tools. Those are like the 1 or 2% things, right, that we add on when everything else is going really well, like when we've mastered the other parts. So I think sleep, hydration, there's no, like, I can't find really good evidence that foam rolling is, or why foam works, but there seems to be evidence that it does work. So foam rolling mobility, hydration, sleep, quality nutrient intake. I think all those are really important. And then one thing I will say is when you do a hard workout, like a quality session, maybe on the track, kilometer repeat, something like that, and you go straight into a strength session, it's good to have a quick digesting carbohydrate. I think during that strength session, it will help you uptake nutrients and protein better post workout, but it will fuel you through the workout as well. So I think that's really important and often overlooked.
Gotcha. Okay, that was you just segued perfectly into my next question, which was going to be, say you do have that track workout, you've got some 1,000-meter repeats or some interval work, something along those lines, and then you're going right into, a 45 to 60-minute strength training session. What does like is it better to do that fasted or and then have something in between? Obviously you just said having something in between would be better, but if you do have that more intense session where you might be doing 2 hours of work versus 1 hour on a typical day, is it better to have something beforehand?
Yeah, I mean, I typically run my first run of the day fasted. Obviously, if I'm running a second time of the day, it's impossible to do it fasted. But I don't like the strength train fasted because I feel weaker in general, and that may just be a mental thing. I'm not totally sure. So what I try to do is like I'll do the hard workout, and then I'll bring some kind of quick digesting carbohydrate with me. So then I'll drink that like intra workout carbohydrate while I'm working out, and then I will take in some kind of protein um, immediately after. And then we've kind of found that a 3-to-1 carbohydrate to protein ratio is the best for recovery. And you're already kind of hitting that carbohydrate part right there as you're in a need for carbohydrates, and then you're taking the protein right on top of it. So for me, some kind of liquid kind of convenience carb is a good option in that case. Even like a piece of fruit or a couple pieces of fruit tend to work out as well. But
Gotcha.
having something I think is crucial for recovery. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. I like that. I like that. So I kind of want to just take a step back, and you and I have been working together for a year, which has been amazing. Like I've learned so much from you about running and strength training and programming and recovery. And I'm always blowing up your phone with different questions and whatnot. But um, I'm in a period right now which is a little bit different where, unfortunately I'm dealing with some knee pain in both knees. So not going according to plan in terms of what I told you. I was like, hey, I really want to ramp up the intensity in terms of, getting faster. So, less volume, more intensity throughout the summer. And then a couple days into that, my knees have been absolutely, beat up from the 3 marathons I've ran in the past like 6 months or so. So what is the best way and it can be discouraging, right? Like the weather's finally nice. Like I've been training all winter. I went for the sub 3 and it didn't happen. And then trained for the ultra, and weather's just starting to get nice. I really want to be outside and running and whatnot. And it sucks that I can't be doing that. But what is the best way to go about, mentally and physically, coming back from an injury and still being able to build that aerobic base so you're able to, come back stronger when you are healthy?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know about that going on with you right now. But for me, I'm going through the same thing as a background to everybody listening. I haven't run in a month now. Unfortunately, I was injured in a soccer game, and then I was able to come back in about 3 weeks from the injury, and I got re-injured shortly after in another like similar kind of gruesome tackle. So As a result, I've been away from running for the longest period in my entire life, as far as I can remember, and I'm battling with a lot of the same things that you are. It's very frustrating to see like a lot of my friends, training partners, being able to run and prepare for races, and I'm so hungry to race and be really competitive again. And unfortunately, I have a layoff like you as well, and I'm faced with the same things. Like, I think 80% of endurance athletes deal with some type of overuse injury that makes them miss more than 2 days that were unplanned. So like, it's very common that athletes will have to miss a few weeks in a given year, and that's the way it is. And while I try to program in a way that is um, I think conservative in my approach, I still think there's the likelihood that somebody's going to get injured is there. It's just so you push your limits when you found it. And unfortunately, both of us have kind of found it at the moment, and we're facing a little bit of a setback. The reality is like my goal doesn't change, and I know how driven you are. Your goal doesn't change either. So this approach, the standard approach, won't work at the moment, and that's only temporary. But you want to maintain like your aerobic base and everything towards that goal. I think you have to pivot and find out what works and put yourself in an environment to thrive. Um, so for me, I can't do anything with a lot of impact on the ankle because of the ligament damage. So I currently am like doing assault bike stuff. I program some of the similar stuff to you. Some
Yeah,
biking stuff that's easier.
it's freaking brutal. It's freaking brutal. I'll
Yeah.
say that. I'll interject. It's tough.
Yeah, it is, but I don't see why any reason that you can't come out of this with a bigger aerobic engine than before. Now, like the run specific mechanics, those will come back along. But overall, I believe that you can maintain at minimum, but likely improve, your lactate threshold, your aerobic capacity, all of these things while you're training in this alternative way, because you're still able to get time in those zones, like those heart metabolic or effort zones. You're still able to do all the things. It's just the running specific part that will come along with just a few weeks of it. So while it's unfortunate, the weather's nice for you. The weather's actually shit here for me because it's like 100 degrees now every day. But while all that sucks, like you can't lose sight of the end goal. Like you have your why. You know why you're doing this. I have my why. Like I know that I want to be the strongest version of myself. Like growing up, I always thought of myself as very weak, and this provides me with the opportunity to be the strongest version of myself and improve myself. And so, like that always drives me. I want to win races again. I want to be competitive again. I want to push the limits and build my life resume while I still can. So, like that's what's driving me to do these workouts that are not ideal. They're very challenging. It's very frustrating. But if I stay focused on that why, kind of at the end of the road, then it's a lot easier to get there.
So for you, what does your training look like right now? And for context, like what Mark's been doing for me, yes. So today is Tuesday. So yesterday I had like 15 rounds of 1 minute hard, 2 minutes easy on the assault bike. And I was spent. I was sitting there in a puddle of sweat in the bodybuilder gym that I go to. People are like, what the heck is this idiot doing? Just smoking himself on the assault bike. But and then today was a couple rounds of um 10 minutes on the rower and then 10 minutes on the air bike, 10 minutes on the rower, 10 minutes on the air bike. So like 40 minutes in that zone too. And then we'll get some more higher intensity stuff going on throughout the week. So is that something that you're doing that's similar to keep building that engine, keep building that base for yourself?
Yeah, it's very similar. The specific workouts are a little bit different because I have more muscular endurance components that I add in just because like I have a fall Hyrox season that I'm really trying to at this point um, trying to salvage. And so it's a little bit different, but overall it's kind of the same thing. Like there are a lot of benchmark workouts in there that are like that, but there's just a lot of like long taxing aerobic workouts which are doing and training the same energy systems that different types of runs would do. Like what you did yesterday, I would consider like the equivalent to like doing a fartlek run right on the road. Like you train the same energy systems. And then today with that lower intensity stuff, you're using three different or two different vessels to do it, but overall you're still getting 40 minutes of like low zone two aerobic work. So I try to keep the structure the same as it would be for running and try to target the same workouts that I would do. So that way, when you do pick up your running, I feel like you're right back where you left off, minus the residual knee pain that you've been dealing with.
So since I've had to kind of shift my focus from, doing, a lot of running this summer, to doing more strength training, prehab, rehab, kind of stuff. Still keeping, I won't announce any races because I haven't officially signed up for anything yet, but I have one on the schedule at the end of the year in early December. So the way that I look at it is like if I start a training block, like a 12-week block, that'll be like around mid-September, right? So until mid-September, even got probably a good, to June, July, August. So a good like, 3.5 months to focus on really getting healthy, getting strong. I'm actually leaning out a little bit right now, which has been good. I feel a lot better than just shoving 500 grams of carbs down my face like I was over the past couple of months. So thinking about that, right now I got really into like the knees over toes guy stuff. So following that kind of programming, which I'm following the foundational program right now, which is like 3 lower body sessions Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and none of them are really that intense. They're very focused on like, tibialis health, calves, then like, VMO squats, ATG split squats, things like that. So after doing it for a week, I already feel pretty solid. And then I'll probably add in like, I'm doing like 2 upper body days in there and kind of leaving like 2 days for recovery in between there. What do you think of that kind of structure? Is there anything that you would add? Are you familiar with that kind of programming? Basically, like looking at my next few months, like how can I really optimize that so that I'm not jumping back into it and then, oh, my knee pain's back and oh, I'm injured again and oh, just the race goal goes out the window.
Yeah, so I am familiar with it, and I think that he's absolutely brilliant. I think the programming is brilliant, and see stuff like that, like rehabilitation, things like that, prehab, all that stuff is really far out of my wheelhouse. Like he's an expert in that field and what he does, and I think his application of it is brilliant. I'm happy that you're already experiencing that. I wouldn't add anything to that. I think with what you're doing, I think that that's perfect. Like my specifics of what I would add would be around like the low impact cross training that we're doing that doesn't really impact that. So for me, like continuing to program that aerobic engine building stuff is what's going to keep you um, from diminishing kind of um, fitness in the aerobic spectrum. So my focus more is on the aerobic part. Like his focus is more on that, and I think that what he's doing is brilliant. So I think it's great that you're on that. And I recommend that to anybody.
So it is very, and granted, I'm only on week 2 of it, but it is more higher volume in terms of like, it's 3 sets of 20 of tib raises and 3 sets of 20 of like, lying hip flexor stretch and some Nordic hamstring curls and things like that. And then, squats, it's like 10 sets of 10 sets at like 10 reps every top at the top of the minute of every minute. So I'm sure it progresses a little bit there, but it probably as I finish up that like dense strength foundational program, um, from there, that would take me into like a 12-week training block leading up to that race in early December. So from there, would it make sense to continue to keep in some of those exercises that are in there, but also add in some more like some compound lifts like we talked about? Like he doesn't program any like trap bar deadlifts or anything like that. And it's a lot of you know, there's squats and front squats and things like that. But yeah, what would your take be on that?
Yeah, I would add some of those things in. So like, I think most people are going to benefit from adding in a variety of parts of different methodologies into their own training to make what works for them the most complete version of that. So yeah, I would. Particularly because the stuff that he's programming is really important for the resilience piece. But in general, you're going to want to maintain some type of muscle mass. You're going to want to, like for me, I know it's important like to have muscle mass because like some of it's just like it's important to me to look a certain way where I feel confident, I feel happy with my body. And I don't think that you can best do that with that program. So while it has an amazing application in the injury prevention and rehabilitation realm, I think it does lack some outside of that, but that's not his purpose. So yeah, I think you'd be remiss to not add those things into your own program. So like The deadlift, when executed properly, I think is probably one of the most effective things that you can do for a really functional and purposeful application in your daily life and in training. So like things like that are missing, I would certainly add. Yeah.
I also feel like ever since so I was running at probably like 195 for the past year or so, and even still, like after that ultra that I did a couple weeks ago was over, I was like, boom, I wasn't eating as much, I wasn't eating as many carbs, and I was up in my proteins, up in my fats a little bit, and I just feel like I feel really like a lot leaner. I feel sharper. I feel like I have more energy. Do you think there's a benefit to like almost like periodizing your nutrition, like just like having like some sort of off season, like obviously like eating for performance versus eating for general health is a little bit different there. But I've kind of been eating the same way for the past year, which is like a lot of food. I'm a bigger guy, just making sure I'm well fueled versus now eating at a slight deficit, eating more fats, more protein, a little less carbs. Is there a benefit to like getting your body better at like burning fat for fuel versus always just like relying on a ton of carbs and having a high caloric intake?
I think that there's a benefit. You're really consuming less calories. Like long term is probably more beneficial for your body, right? Because people who have a lower body weight in general tend to live longer, right? So if we're looking from a metabolic application, like eating a whole bunch of carbohydrates all the time is probably not the most effective. But I think that as a society, we get caught too far in the extremes of everything, right? Like I think Eliud Kipchoge, the world marathon record holder and best to ever do it, frankly. His diet's about 70% carbohydrates, right? But then a guy that you just had on the show, and I apologize, I don't remember his name, eats like effectively no carbohydrates, right? And he has success at what he does. Kipchoge has success at what he does, but it all depends on a lot of things. So I think like maybe not so much periodizing it, but through trial and error, finding out what is right for you is probably the best way to go. Although my scope on nutrition is pretty limited. The advice that I would give everybody is 80% of the time, try to make really good decisions, and the other 20% of the time, like have some fun. And that typically tends to work out. I don't really eat a certain way to try to achieve anything. I just try to make sure that I'm eating enough quality food, enough fiber, which some people would argue, but I think like very little things in nutrition are solidified. But the reality is that fiber is one of the true things that are proven by science to be really important for our body and for our health. So, I try to make sure I'm getting adequate fiber intake, like micronutrient, macronutrient, just loosely hitting my goals, and then otherwise, like just living room to live my life. And I think that's the best way I can do it. I think too often we get caught in the extremes. So I'm not saying you should periodize and sometimes eat lower carbohydrates and sometimes eat higher. I think you should find something that works for you consistently and do that.
What are your thoughts on picking certain races to focus on throughout the year versus like constantly just being in this state of like go go go? Because I felt like after a year of like marathon, boom, a couple months later marathon, up next month ultra, like, and it was like 10 and a half, almost 11 months of just straight go go go. Is that okay, or should you focus on like, like a fall race, a spring race, have some sort of off season? Because I think about my time playing football, right? It was like we played for 3 months out of the year. We trained for 9, but we had that off season, we had that post season, we had the preseason, we had the in season. There's really like four areas. So what are your thoughts on like structuring like a year? Like you're starting, doesn't have to be like January 1, but a year of training. What would you recommend for, a person looking at doing a couple different races?
Yeah, I mean, I would look at it two ways, physical and mental. So, from a physical standpoint, it's nearly impossible to maintain like peak fitness and to continuously build fitness year round. You just run a really high risk of injury or burnout, and then the risk gets higher the longer that you push it. So, while I try to program 3 weeks up, 1 week down, or 2 weeks up, 1 week down, depending on the athlete, um, it doesn't matter. Like I think sometimes you just need a physical break. From a mental standpoint, it's impossible to be on all the time. And then you got to think about like your life outside of sport and outside of competition. Um, you start to lose fulfillment in those areas if you're always go, 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 go. And, your career may suffer, your personal life may suffer, all of these things. And then you still can't be the best athlete that you'd be anyway if all those things are clicking as it is. So I think with the risk of physical and mental burnout being so high, you should pick key races and have down weeks inside of each training cycle, but then have down seasons outside of it. Typically, I'll focus on like in the summer, I'll try to focus on like ultra endurance races. In the fall and spring, I'll try to focus on Hyrox stuff, and on the winter is kind of more of a base thing. Um, and I tend not to overtrain at any period during that time, but like with having multiple areas of focus, and then things like outside of just competition, like that are still competition for me, like for example, soccer. That's kind of year round for me, but it provides a break from the demands of it's a lot more fun to me than like the demands of racing and competing and the pressure that comes along with that. So for me, because I'm doing so much, like I try to break it into 4 seasons and make sure I'm taking adequate downtime. And I recommend that everybody to do what you did. We knew that you were going to be pushing the limits, and we knew at some point you were going to be finding them. And I think we've hit that point, right? So um, there's diminishing returns after a while. So yeah, I think you have to choose races strategically. You have to prioritize your mental health, your recovery, all of these things. So 100%, I think you should focus on 2 or 3 key races a year, build other stuff around it, have a lot of fun, and build your life resume and have some fucking enjoyment in your life. To be honest, yeah.
I love how you've mentioned, building your life resume a couple times throughout this, and I love that concept. I'm a huge fan of Jesse Itzler and how he talks about the concept of just continuing to build your life resume and collect experiences, spend time with good people, and just ultimately pursue the best version of yourself and the things that fulfill you each and every day. I know you have a lot of exciting things going on in your life, but is there anything that really, really excites you in the coming months, in the coming years, and just something that really, really lights your soul up when you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think continuing to try to push my limits as a hybrid athlete is a really exciting prospect for me. But like I'm in survival mode for the next 5 days basically because I work corporately for New Balance Athletics, the footwear company, and I work on the run performance side in a sales role, and I have a massive deadline coming up on Friday. So right now, I feel like I'm just trying not to sink and try to stay afloat. But beyond that, I'm really excited about some things. I'm currently writing a book which I'm going to launch. I'm excited to continue to build and maintain the coaching platform that I built. I'm lucky enough to work with 40 endurance athletes. And then just relaunching my podcast is really exciting for me. But I think all things are leading me towards world championships in 2024 in Hyrox. I didn't compete this year just because the injury would have kept me out anyway, but I didn't plan to compete because it falls in the same week as my sales deadline, and it would have just been tough to go to England. But next week, or next year, just full go on that. So I got to get healthy. I have to get this ankle rehab, and I look forward to the being back in the daily grind because I've been off long enough, and I'm so stoked about all of those things. It's a little overwhelming to think about, being a parent, working a full time career, basically having a full time job in coaching, trying to write a book, trying to continue to produce quality content on my podcast and social media, all while trying to find time for myself and compete at the highest level. It's a daunting task, but my life is filled with the things that I love, and I'm absolutely enveloped in the things that set my soul on fire, and I get to live my dream every single day. So I'm just like excited about that, to be honest. I'm just stoked about the life that I've built for myself, the life that I get to live. And injuries that I'm going through right now are hard mentally and physically, and you know, you take a lot of that for granted, but it reminds you what's really important. So I'm ready to hit the ground running when I get the chance to do so.
Dude, I love that. This has been an epic conversation. I really enjoyed this. Dude, I just enjoy learning from you. I love shooting you text just because I know you're going to give me some great information, and I love following you on Instagram, and I'm excited to hear your podcast coming back. So many good stuff, so much value you're bringing to the world. But I want to ask one quick question, and then I'll ask my final question, and we'll wrap this up. But what is one piece of advice that you got earlier on in life that you listened to but you wish that you hadn't?
Oh, okay. So that's pretty easy. Um, this is gonna sound kind of fucked up, but I fell into this little lull of like, um, I was struggling with competition, and and I was struggling with balancing all the things that I'd previously talked about. And somebody said you should just take some time off and love yourself more. And I'll tell you what I did. Like I do love myself, but adapting that mentality, I became really soft and like I took that to the extreme. So I don't think that we should ever distance ourselves from the things we love just because they're hard. I think that we should lean into the things that we love and pursue them and know that they're going to be hard anyway. And as a result, for me, I think like getting too far into the self love, self care thing to the point where I was becoming lazy was a problem. And I shouldn't have listened to that advice, to be honest. And I know that sounds terrible. It sounds like the opposite of everything I'm saying, but I took it to the extreme like I do with everything. And I just fell off and I felt like a shell of myself. I felt like a shell of myself without competition. And I feel a lot healthier when I have competition in my life.
Thank you for sharing that, dude. I think we all have these, having something to pursue gives us meaning, gives us fulfillment. And Mike McKnight was the guy who I just had on. He was the low carb runner, and he said a quote that's been sticking with me recently, and it's comfort is a waste of potential. So I love that, and just being able to apply that every single day to your life. It's like, okay, yes, love yourself, but also like push yourself and see what you're capable of. So I love that.
Yeah, I love that. Like for context, my one of my close friends said, you've built this, you have like this tremendous career, you have the house that you've always wanted, you have the car that you've always wanted, you have all these things. Like, why not take a year and enjoy it? Like, why not take some time away from competing? Like, because it causes you so much stress. Like, why not try to eliminate some of the stress in your life? And I realized that like trying to eliminate the stress in my life of not reaching my potential actually wasted a year of my life, effectively, a year that I'll never get back because ultimately this stuff caused me stress, but I love it. I love it and I live for it. And without that purpose, without that pursuit, I really had nothing, even though I have the dream car, right? I have these stupid fucking necklaces and all this other shit. But like I without the pursuit, I had nothing. So I love that quote and that just fires me up even more.
Hell yeah, dude. Well, Mark, I appreciate it, man. This is your second time on the podcast, so we'll have to do these somewhat regularly because I love learning from you. I asked you this question the last time you were on this podcast. I'm curious if your answer's changed at all, and that is, when you hear the word ambition, what does that mean to you, and how does it apply to your daily life?
No, ambition is like for me. I don't remember what I said last time, and I know that I didn't give a good answer. Probably the one that I wanted to because it's such a hard question. But uh, for me, like ambition is a measure. Like to I believe that you should surround yourself with the people that you want to be most like. And one of the first things I look for is like ambition in people. And if they don't have ambition, I don't want them around me. So ambition to me is an identifier of what I'm chasing in my life, but also all the people that I want to put in my life and have in my circle. So for me, like ambition is everything, to be honest. Like straight up, like if you don't have it, I don't want to understand that. Kobe Bryant has a quote like, "I don't understand lazy people. I don't want to understand lazy people," and that's how I feel about people who lack ambition. Like ambition keeps the world going and keeps me thriving and my friends as well. So that's how I feel about it.
Whew, fire me up with that. I love it. I love that. Dude, this was an epic conversation. Mark, I always appreciate you, man. If people are interested in checking out more of your content, if they want to connect with you, where are you hanging out and what's the best way for them to reach you?
So you can find me probably the place where I'm most responsive. I would just check me out on Instagram. It's at Bottenhorn Running. So it's my last name. I'm sure it'll be but it's Bottenhorn running. So that's probably the best place to find me. And then you can find me at www.runstrongtc.com. But otherwise, I just want to stay down while I have you here. I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate being able to work with you as an athlete because I learn a lot from you as well. And I would love to get you on the new and relaunched version of the Fine Strong podcast in some capacity. Hopefully a recurring capacity would be great.
That'd be amazing, man. I love it. I'm really grateful for this connection. Grateful that we're able to learn from each other, and let's just continue to pursue the best version of ourselves and people. If you take anything away from today, like I have, it's just, find something that lights you up and that inspires you. And stress isn't always a bad thing, right? A little bit of stress is good, keeps you moving forward, and keeps you pursuing something meaningful in life. So, Mark, I appreciate you. Thank you for coaching me for this past year, and all the help that you'll continue to give me and so many other athletes.
All right, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. Bye, everybody.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's episode. I wanted to give you all a heads up too that I launched a free community on the Upspace app where you can join, ask me questions, connect with like-minded individuals, follow my 4-week running and strength training program that has some dedicated mobility sessions in there as well, so that we can all optimize our health and fitness together. So if you're interested, head over to the App Store, download the Upspace app, and join the Pure Ambition community today. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.